Good afternoon, I think it is. It's just we have a slight delay, which means that we will extend the session a little bit. Good afternoon, my name is, as you can see on the program, Edgar Beugels. I'm the head of the Research and Development Unit in Frontex. And I'm here to be your moderator for the session on border guards and technology. Border guards and technology. Performing border control has been in the past very much a manual process conducted by border guards. Over time we have seen that little by little elements of technology have been introduced in order to support the work of the border guards. And in recent times the advances in technology and technology implementation to support the work of border guard officers has gained momentum, and more new technologies have found their way to the border guard scene. Today we will be focusing on the implementation of those new technologies, and also exactly on what kind of role these technologies are playing. Are they supposed to completely replace the border guards? Are they supposed to support their work, maybe? These are the kind of questions that we will address during this debate session. For your information, we have changed the sequence a little bit of the statements that are going to be made by the participants in this debate. We will start with the Ruud Dirkswager, the commander of the National Center for Training and Expertise in Apeldoorn of the Royal Netherlands Marechaussee, and as he will present a short movie to us, which we believe will form a good base for the discussion afterwards. Also for your information, we will listen first to the different speakers and their statements. Afterwards, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. So, Ruud, may I invite you then to present your movie?
You may, thank you. We made a short animation about how border passing, border management might look in 10 years' time. It's an animation, so it's not for real, but you might see some types of technology which already exist. And we have tried to put them together and give you an impression how it might look like in 10 years' time. And afterwards, I think it might give enough possibilities to discuss and talk about the different topics connected to the border crossing and technology. I'd like to ask the technology to start the animation, please. Thank you. Well, this is how it might look in 10 years' time. We've tried to combine different already existing technologies with something that might occur in the coming years. We've looked at it from a trainers and education point of view. And a lot of people think that technology will replace the personnel. Well, I don't think that. And I think that when you look at the type of job, and you can never replace the personnel by machine. The machine will support personnel, but personnel will always be needed. For instance, if there's a hit, you need to follow up. The follow-up is done by personnel. Personnel needs to know what to do. They need to know about regulation. They need to know about procedures and everything which belongs to that. Other hand, you have to know what's going on behind the machine. You have to know what's going on behind the technology. Furthermore, technology might fail, and then you have to be able to take over. So, although the type of education and training of border guards will change, but you still need certain basic tools and certain basic theory and certain basic practical skills. So from our point of view, the training will change because we bring in more technology. I think the time in the classroom might get shorter, but it will be replaced by a lot of time on the working place to get practical skills. That's what we think. Other thing is, I think that the technology of today and the technology of tomorrow will appeal very much to the now generation and the coming generation. When you look at how they deal with the social media and how fast they are, at least much faster than I am with my computer, with my handheld, it will appeal to them. So I think it will make, for that generation, it will make the work of border guarding more interesting. And so we believe that technology will help, will support, but it will also provide more hits. That's what we think. If the technology helps in that way, more hits, and then you need more people in the back office to support. I think I'm going to stick with this for so far, and then we'll see what comes out of the discussions afterwards.
Thank you, Ruud. One question. You mentioned the knowledge of the technology. Knowledge of the technology on the part of the border guards who are working with the technology. I just wondering, on the one hand, knowledge would be about what technology can do, but an important part is also knowledge about what the technology cannot do. And do you think that there will be an over-reliance on technology and that it would be a major risk? In other words, that border guards would believe that technology can do this, so I don't have to know exactly what it does, and I just watch the red or the green lamp at the end, and that's it?
That's a risk, I agree, and therefore border guards, they need the full training. Not only watch the green or the red light. That's why I mentioned with what I meant with they need to know what's going on behind the technology. They need to know the procedures. They need to know the regulations about border crossing. If you only rely on a green or a red light, and then I think the job will get very poor. And it might get boring very, very fast.
And then one starts to make mistakes, no? Isabel Baltasar, head of the Department of Fraud Unit and Identification Department of the CEF in Portugal. What do you think about this?
Thank you. Thank you, Edgar. Let me start by saying that I can't agree more with Ruud. As a matter of fact, I believe that a balanced approach is a key statement in relation to technology and border guarding. I truly believe, and I guess that nobody will doubt, that technology is fundamental for addressing modern security challenges, but we need to balance that technology with human intervention. By saying this, I would like to stress the idea that I don't believe in automation as a full automation. You can have monitored automation, but full automation is something that, well, it's not for sure seen to our days. Yet, taking some of the words and the statements of Ruth, I believe that there's a need to get back to basics. And by saying this, I mean that we need to go back and to invest on training, on informing, on making accessible tools to border guards, because last, what we need is to have border guards able of informed decisions. They are the ones that at last will take the decision. We know that the machine is there to help and to support, but still it's up to the border guard, to the human presence, to make the decision yes or no for a certain individual to enter a country, for example. So if I may, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on this, because as I said, I'm in favor, of course, of using technology, and by saying this, I would like to stress the need to have a close cooperation with the industry. I believe it's a win-win situation. It's only by this approach that we can tell industry what our needs are. It's by this approach that industry can best respond to our needs. And this is a good compromise, I would say. My background comes from document expertise and document policy, security documents, everything that has to do with this. So excuse me if I'm a little bit biased by my perspective, as I will focus more on documents. I'm very familiar with the construction of a security document, and I would like to stress the point that document security is based on a layered approach. That means that we have first a substrate, then we print a document, then you personalize a document, and lastly, you can add other additional security features, just like the chip, just like biometrics, and by this, not in any moment it means that any of these security features added at these stages are conflicting or are replacing some of the existing security features. By this, I just want to make a point by saying that the chip and everything that is connected with that and with the technology is not replacing which is already in the document. You have to have a fallback situation for a case that you need it, and yet there's a need, yes, for checking the things that are already there in the document. Last but not the least, I would like to say that the paradigm of fraud is changing. In the past, or maybe until recently, the issues concerning fraud were mostly forgeries and counterfeits. Nowadays, we are looking at lookalike fraud, and we are looking to fraudulent processes. And the more we are adding on security on documents, the more we need to get back to basics and to the earliest stages of the registration of identity of a person. And so I would say, of course, technology is needed. We need to monitor their usage, and blind faith on technology can raise as many, can solve as many problems as it may raise in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. You mentioned this change in changing scene of the in relation to intents to cross the border, changing from false or falsified travel documents to lookalike fraud. In what way and to what extent would technology be able to support the work of the border guards? Because lookalike fraud is, I mean, it's very difficult in the sense that you are sitting in a passport control booth as a border guard officer, you see a few thousand people coming and going, and in a split second or split seconds you have to decide whether this person, whether this travel document belongs to that person. To what extent do you see that technology could support and could help out border guards while doing that?
I think that there's already something in place that helps in that respect, which is face recognition. But I believe also that we have to be very realistic. And by looking at the world, just a few countries are doing face recognition at the moment. So there's a whole number of countries in the world that do not use this technology. And to be very realistic, I don't know when some of these countries will ever be doing this kind of checks. So there's space for technology to support border guards, but still there's a long way to come before there's better reliance and better levels of control, I would say.
Frank Paul, Head of Unit Large-Scale IT Systems, Biometrics, European Commission. The introduction of the visa information system is well underway. Enter and exit under discussion in Brussels. These are quite big, very much technology-related projects. How do you see that it will fit in with the work of the border guards at this moment, and to what extent will it mean changes for the border guards?
Right. I think when we talk about the future of that border guards can expect in terms of how their work is going to be transformed and changed, I think we first have to look at some very basic, simple facts. Fact number one, everybody expects that passenger flows are going to increase dramatically, especially at the airports, and indeed, you don't have to be scientists to understand that if you think about, for instance, emerging economic powers like India and China with a combined population of 2.4 billion people, if only 2 or 3% of that population would like to see the Eiffel Tower or Big Ben or whatever else we have to offer here in Europe once in a lifetime, this will alone as such almost increase passenger numbers by twofold in the coming decade and the coming 20 years. So passenger numbers are going to increase, even if it's very difficult to foretell the future, obviously. Everybody agrees on that. Obviously, it depends on further developments, how are petrol prices are going to change, how is the economy in general going. This will all have an influence on passenger numbers, but the general consensus is passenger numbers will dramatically increase. Also, fact number two, there will be no or little budget increases over the next decade. I think that is very obvious. So you can't simply say, well, no problem, we have more passengers, we'll simply expand the number of people we will deploy at the borders to check on these people, to check on these passengers. That is simply not going to happen. So the only way to be able to process that passenger flow while at the same time not making any compromises on security is to use technology. So it's not a question of whether, it's simply a question of how. I think that must be very obvious. Now, there are a couple of other facts I think that I have in the past decade while working on all sorts of technology learned, is that you have to make it simple. If it's not simple, it doesn't work. And that means already that if you're a border guard and you have somebody in front of you and you have to check that system, and then you open another screen and another screen to check yet another system and another system, this doesn't work. You have to make it simple, both for the border guard and for the passenger. Now I'm coming to the fourth fact. and that is that obviously the very vast majority of our travelers that we welcome in Europe are people we don't have any problem whatsoever with, who are most welcome, and yet, for the time being, we're still giving more or less the same treatment to everybody. That doesn't make sense, and that binds a lot of our human resources, our manpower we have at the borders. And the future, of course, should be to facilitate, and that can only be done by clever identity management and using modern technology in a clever way. We have to facilitate that very, very huge percentage of so-called bona fide travelers and focus the resources we have, and resources will always remain scarce. We have to focus those resources on the high-risk travelers. And that also goes hand in hand together with a trend that we see clearly emerging, and that is that gradually we will have to move away when it comes to risk assessment from a country-centric approach to a person-centric approach. What does that mean? For the time being, we basically say that this or that country, for various reasons, is a risk, and therefore all nationals, or is a higher risk than other countries, so therefore the nationals of this country need a visa. But that doesn't make any sense. Why should, I just quote one example, why should every Lebanese traveler be treated in the same way and be asked to apply for a visa? Yes, there are maybe a handful of Lebanese we have a serious problem with, but the vast majority are obviously people who just want to have a good time, go vacationing, spend a lot of money in Europe. So they're most welcome, obviously. Therefore, we have to move from that country-centric approach to a person-centric approach where we look at the individual, where we look at his past and present behavior and are able to assess whether this person is a risk, yes or no. Now, that requires two things. It first of all requires a very tight identity management. You have to be sure that a person who comes in is given, for the first time, is given a certain identity which he or she is unable to change for the rest of his or her lifetime. That is very important, or only obviously if he or she has a very good reason, like marriage, changing names, etc., etc. So the identity, once you have established this, cannot be changed, because that is the only way how you are later able to link your risk assessment related to that person to that person. So you need the identity management in order to be able to do risk assessment, and only if you are able to do a risk assessment that is based on the individual are you able to forget about the current approach that we have, that it's visa-based, country-based, and not linked to the person. The fourth fact that I would like to mention is that if people do not see the benefit, it will not work. That is very clear when it comes to deployment of any technology at the borders, and that means both the border guards, if it's not clearly explained to border guards that this will make their life easier, that they will be able to have a more interesting job, that this will be less routine by using this modern technology, they will accept it, because it's a question of acceptance. How many systems have been deployed that were extremely complicated, where the benefits were never properly explained, and after a while people simply don't use it. And the same applies to the passenger. If you explain to the passenger, yes, maybe you have to provide your fingerprint or any other biometric identifier, but then in turn you will have the following benefit. You can go through automated border control. You can use the border control and you can calculate your waiting times much better. You will have a much more pleasant travel experience. This is something everybody understands, and it's only under these conditions that people will be able and ready to accept that new technology. So this is not about deploying fancy high-tech stuff that industry would like to sell just for the sake of having the latest gadget, but it's really about acceptability. And that acceptability, by the way, and that's very important and sometimes forgotten also in the previous presentations I thought of industry that was given in the break, that it is not acceptable if the privacy-related aspect, data protection-related aspects are not properly taken into consideration. They should be explained to people, because it's only then that it's much better accepted. Now, coming back very quickly to the movie we saw at the beginning, I very much agree with a lot of what I saw. However, coming to that privacy aspect, I do see some worries. If you are able to scan automatically everybody who walks into the airport, have a facial recognition system, link them to a database, if you really want to know the status of everyone, you basically have to have very, very huge databases. You need a very, very good privacy justification to be able to do this. And I think under this current climate, and rightly so, the concerns that the citizens have about that, it is probably not going to happen anytime soon. Now, my personal vision of border control in 2020 is a little bit as follows, and I'm referring now to largely to airports, largely to seaports, partly to land borders. At the land borders, obviously, you have to modify that process because land borders are the most difficult to control and to deploy new technology to. But basically, when it comes to airports, the way I see it, everybody, or almost everybody, 98% of all travelers will be able to use automated border control checkpoints. And if you take a look at the groups of travelers that you have arriving at the borders, who do you have? You have European citizens, our own citizens, who go back to the Schengen area or to Europe. When I say Europe, I, for the time being, refer only to the Schengen area, which is wider than the European Union, but also does not include some of our member states. And then you have third country nationals who need a visa. And then you have third country nationals who are visa waived. So the way I see it, anybody of that group that arrives uses the same automated gates. If it's a European citizen, he puts his passport on a reader. The reader recognizes it's a European passport. The fingerprint is being downloaded, or the facial image, or both, are being downloaded onto the ABC gate, and a comparison is made. So the person puts his finger on the plate and looks into a camera. If everything's okay, there might be random checks in the SIS2 as well. There's a green light and the person is in. That takes not even 20 seconds, it can take less. Next passenger who arrives is a gentleman from Sri Lanka who needs a visa. He does have a visa in his passport, so he scans the unique identification number that is on his visa. So his credential is really not the passport, his credential is the visa. And with that unique identification number, you will be able to download, and that'll happen very soon, as from October, by the way, when we are ready to deploy the VIS at our borders and in the first region, which is going to be North Africa. Then with that number, you can download the fingerprint that was given at the time when the person applied for the visa and compare whether the person who's there is still the same person to whom the visa has been issued. And as every border guard knows, this is not necessarily the case today. And then you have a check in the visa information system, you have a check in the Schengen information system, a systematic one this time, contrary to the European citizen, where there's a random check on the SIS2, and then if it's okay, you get in. Now you have the third person arriving, and he's an American citizen, so he does not need a visa. Now, he does have a biometric passport, but that biometric passport is relatively useless for our purposes because it doesn't contain a fingerprint. So in order to process such a traveler via automated gates, what you would need to do, you would need to enroll him in a so-called registered traveler system, and this is something that the European Commission is currently very actively investigating, and where member states have already asked us to submit legislation, where basically you register on a voluntary basis, you're being checked very thoroughly, and if it is established that you're a low-risk passenger, you're being given a token with your fingerprints or your biometrics, other biometrics, and that token you use in the same way as a European citizen uses his or her passport. And that has the advantage that you simply have to deploy one type of gates in which you can process all types of travelers. Of course, there will always be travelers who will not be able to be processed through these automated gates. People who have problems with the biometrics, or people who travel once in a lifetime and don't feel the need to register in a registered traveler program, and they will still be processed manually, just as they are, as it happens today. But in principle, you will be able to process the vast majority of travelers like this. And that has the additional advantage that you can very flexibly adapt your flows, because today, the type of passengers changes very often over the course of a day. In the morning, typically you have a huge number of flights coming in from North America, from certain parts of Asia. At other times of the day, you have mostly travelers from other countries that would require a visa, et cetera, et cetera. So you can very flexibly adapt your passenger flows. The other thing, and this now goes beyond the mere entry control, is that in terms of illegal immigration, if you look at the numbers, the problems are not necessarily the persons who try to cross the Mediterranean in unseaworthy boats. Of course, it's a tragedy what happens there, and deterring people from risking their lives and saving people if they have managed to risk their lives is the absolute #1 priority at all times. However, in terms of numbers, illegal immigration, this is not the real problem. The real problem are the overstayers. An estimated 800,000 people who get into the European Union on a visa that they have correctly obtained or that they have fraudulously obtained, and then they simply don't leave when they're supposed to leave. Or people who are visa waived and who do the same thing. And this is the real problem when it comes to illegal immigration. And today we don't know who these people are. We don't know